They called her selfish. Her mother said it first, then her sister repeated it, and eventually her closest friend confirmed what she'd been afraid of all along. She had stopped answering every call. She had canceled plans without guilt. She had started closing her door, literally and psychologically, to anyone who showed up expecting her to carry their weight. And the people who'd grown comfortable using her as an emotional landfill decided this meant something was wrong with her. Carl Jung would have recognized this woman immediately. Not as a case study, not as a diagnosis, but as someone entering the most misunderstood phase of psychological development he ever documented. He called it individuation. And it begins the moment a person turns their entire focus inward and lets the world outside handle itself. What fascinated Jung wasn't that people went through this. What fascinated him was what happened to everyone around them when they did. Because the person focusing on themselves often thrives, but the system they leave behind erupts into chaos, guilt campaigns, and accusations of abandonment. Today I'm going to show you what Jung discovered actually happens inside someone who commits fully to self-focus, why the people around them react with such ferocity, the specific psychological stages this process moves through, and why most people abandon this path right before it transforms them completely. Because the social pressure to go back to who they were becomes almost unbearable. Jung arrived at his understanding of radical self-focus through a route no one expected. He didn't study monks or hermits or spiritual seekers who had intentionally withdrawn from society. He studied ordinary people, his patients, who reached a point where focusing on others simply stopped being possible. Their nervous systems refused to continue. The wife who'd managed her husband's emotions for 30 years suddenly couldn't do it anymore. The son, who'd been his mother's emotional support since childhood, woke up one morning and felt nothing when she called crying. The friend who'd always been available hit a wall and found the word no coming out of her mouth before she could stop it. These weren't decisions, they were psychological events. Something inside these people shifted, and the shift was involuntary. Jung observed that this happened most often in people who'd spent their entire lives organized around others' needs. People whose identity was built on being helpful, available, accommodating. People who knew everyone else's emotional landscape intimately, but couldn't describe their own internal world with any accuracy. Jung called these people psychologically colonized. Their inner territory had been occupied by everyone else's needs, emotions, expectations, and demands for so long that they'd never actually inhabited their own psyche. They lived in other people. Their thoughts were about other people's problems. Their emotions were responses to other people's states. Their energy went toward managing other people's experiences. And at some point, the psyche rebels against this arrangement because it was never sustainable. The rebellion doesn't look spiritual or enlightened. It looks like someone becoming cold, distant, unavailable. The warmth that everyone counted on disappears, and in its place is something that looks like indifference, but is actually the first stage of what Jung identified as psychological reclamation. The person is pulling their energy back from every external investment and redirecting it inward, not because they've decided to be selfish, because their psyche has determined that they will die, psychologically, sometimes physically, if they don't. Jung documented that the first thing that happens when someone truly focuses on themselves is a confrontation with emptiness. When you stop managing everyone else's emotional world and turn inward, you expect to find yourself there. You expect a rich inner landscape waiting to be explored. Instead, most people find almost nothing, a vast, echoing emptiness where a self should be. This is the terrifying discovery that sends most people running back to their old patterns, because caring for others, exhausting as it was, at least gave them a sense of identity. Without that role, they don't know who they are. Jung saw this emptiness not as a problem, but as an honest starting point. The emptiness was always there. It was just hidden beneath layers of other people's needs. The constant activity of managing, helping, caring, supporting, all of it functioned as a distraction from the fact that the person had never developed a relationship with themselves. They'd been so busy being someone for everyone else that they'd never become someone for themselves. This emptiness is where the real work begins, and it's the stage where Jung found most people either break through or break down. Because sitting with emptiness, without reaching for your phone to check on someone, without finding a crisis to manage, without offering yourself up as emotional support for another person's problem, that requires a tolerance for discomfort that most people have never developed. The emptiness feels like death. It feels like you're disappearing. And in a sense, you are. The version of you that existed only in relation to others is dying, and nothing has emerged yet to take its place. Jung described this as the necessary death that precedes genuine selfhood. You can't become who you actually are while still performing who everyone needs you to be. The performance has to end first, and when it ends, there's a gap, a void, a period of not knowing that can last weeks or months, or sometimes longer. During this gap, the people around you will do everything in their power to pull you back into the old role because your emptiness threatens them almost as much as it threatens you. The second thing Jung documented was the eruption of the shadow. When you stop directing all your energy outward and turn it inward, you don't just find emptiness. You find everything you've been avoiding by staying busy with other people's lives. Every wound you never processed, every anger you never expressed, every need you never acknowledged, every resentment you buried under layers of compassion and understanding. It all surfaces, and it surfaces with force. Jung found that people in this stage of self-focus became temporarily difficult to be around, not because they were regressing, but because decades of suppressed material was finally finding expression. The person who never got angry suddenly had rage. The person who never said no became almost aggressively boundaried. The person who always put others first started putting others last, with an intensity that startled everyone, including themselves. This is the shadow demanding integration. All the qualities you rejected in order to be the good one, the helpful one, the selfless one, they don't disappear when you suppress them. They accumulate. And when you finally stop the outward performance and turn inward, they rush to the surface like air escaping from underwater. Jung called this the return of the repressed, and he emphasized that it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that the psyche trusts you enough to show you what it's been holding. The anger isn't new. It's old anger that was never allowed space. The selfishness isn't regression. It's a corrective swing after a lifetime of self-erasure. The coldness isn't cruelty. It's your nervous system establishing distance so it can finally process what proximity never allowed it to feel. But the people around someone going through this stage don't see it that way. They see someone they relied on becoming unreliable, someone they depended on becoming unavailable, someone they thought they understood becoming unrecognizable. And their response, almost universally, is to pathologize the change. You're being selfish. You've changed. What happened to you? You used to be so caring. Jung observed that these reactions revealed something uncomfortable about the relationships the self-focused person was in. If your relationships only function when you're self-sacrificing, those relationships were never built on mutuality. They were built on your compliance. And the moment you stop complying, the structure collapses. Not because you destroyed it, but because it was never stable. It was held up entirely by your willingness to abandon yourself. Before we continue, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. The third thing Jung found was the emergence of genuine desire. After the emptiness and after the shadow eruption, something unexpected begins to appear. Preferences, wants, needs that belong to you and no one else. Small at first, you realize you actually hate the music you've been listening to because your partner liked it. You notice you've been eating food you don't enjoy because it's what the family always ate. You discover that the career you chose was your parents' dream, not yours. These seem like minor revelations, but Jung recognized them as profound. Because for someone who spent their entire life organized around others' preferences, discovering their own is like learning to see color after a lifetime of gray. Each genuine desire is evidence that a self exists underneath all the accommodation. Each authentic preference proves that you weren't empty after all. You were buried. Jung described this stage as the psyche's attempt to introduce you to yourself, and he warned that it would feel foreign. Pursuing what you actually want instead of what everyone expects creates a dissonance so sharp that many people experience genuine anxiety, because wanting something for yourself means potentially disappointing someone else. And for a person whose entire identity was built on not disappointing anyone, that feels catastrophic. But Jung insisted this dissonance was the price of becoming real. You cannot individuate, cannot become a whole, authentic person, while still organizing your life around other people's comfort. At some point, your comfort has to matter more to you than theirs. Not because you're more important, because you're the only one responsible for your psychological survival, and you've been neglecting that responsibility your entire life. The fourth development Jung documented was the reorganization of relationships. When someone commits to self-focus, their relationships don't just change in tone, they restructure entirely. Some relationships that seemed essential reveal themselves as hollow when you stop performing your role. The friend you talk to every day turns out to have nothing to say when you stop asking questions. The family member who called regularly stops calling entirely when you stop providing emotional labor. The partner who seemed loving becomes hostile when you develop needs of your own. Jung called this the revelation of relational truth. Self-focus doesn't destroy good relationships. It destroys relationships that were parasitic, enmeshed, or built on one person's self-abandonment. And this destruction, while painful, is diagnostic. It shows you which connections were real and which were transactions disguised as love. But amid the collapse, something else happens. The few relationships that survive your transformation deepen in ways that weren't possible before. Because now you're showing up as an actual person, not a performance. You have needs, boundaries, preferences, desires. You're not just a mirror reflecting back whatever the other person wants to see. You're a separate individual engaging authentically. And the people who can handle that, the ones who don't need your compliance to feel safe. Those connections become more intimate than anything you experienced while performing selflessness. Jung noted that most people going through this process lose approximately half their relationships, sometimes more, and the grief of that loss is genuine and shouldn't be minimized. These were people you cared about, people you invested in, people you thought would be in your life forever. Discovering that they were only there because of what you provided, not because of who you are, is one of the most painful revelations of the individuation process. The fifth thing Jung documented was the development of what he called psychological sovereignty. This is the stage where self-focus stops feeling selfish and starts feeling natural, where the guilt of putting yourself first dissolves because you've seen clearly what happens when you don't. Where the emptiness has been filled not with other people's needs, but with your own developing selfhood. Psychological sovereignty means you make decisions from your own center, rather than from the anticipated reactions of everyone around you. You choose based on what's true for you, rather than what will keep the peace. You allocate your energy based on genuine desire, rather than obligation or guilt. You engage with others because you want to, not because you'd feel terrible if you didn't. Jung observed that people who reached this stage became fundamentally different in how they moved through the world. They were present in conversations instead of scanning for emotional needs to meet. They were relaxed in social situations instead of hyper-vigilant about everyone's comfort. They could be in a room with someone in pain and feel compassion without feeling compelled to fix it. They could witness someone struggle without making it their responsibility. This wasn't coldness. Jung was very specific about this distinction. This was healthy differentiation, the ability to be emotionally present without being emotionally absorbed, to care without carrying, to witness without rescuing. And this state, which most people around them interpreted as the person becoming less caring, was actually the person becoming capable of genuine care for the first time. Because care that comes from choice is real. Care that comes from compulsion is performance. The paradox Jung found most striking was this. People who went through radical self-focus and came out the other side didn't become permanently selfish. They became selectively generous. Their giving, when it happened, came from overflow rather than depletion, from desire rather than duty, from strength rather than the desperate need to be needed. And this kind of giving was infinitely more valuable than the compulsive helping they'd done before, because it was sustainable, it was real, it could be trusted. But here's what Jung also found, and this is the part most people don't want to hear. The process of radical self-focus requires a period that genuinely looks and feels selfish. Not selfishness as a permanent state, but selfishness as a corrective experience. After decades of self-abandonment, the psyche needs time to swing to the other extreme before finding balance. You need a period of putting yourself first excessively before you can learn to put yourself first appropriately. This means there will be a stretch of time where you are objectively less available, less caring, less accommodating than you used to be, where people's needs that you would have dropped everything for barely register. Where you hear about someone's crisis and your first thought is, that's their problem. Jung didn't romanticize this stage. He acknowledged it was uncomfortable for everyone involved, but he insisted it was necessary. You cannot develop a self while still giving yourself away. The development requires temporary withdrawal, like a caterpillar that has to dissolve entirely inside the cocoon before it can become something new. Jung warned his patients about the most dangerous moment in this entire process. It comes about 3 to 6 months into genuine self-focus, when the social pressure reaches its peak. Everyone has noticed the change. The guilt campaigns are in full force. Former friends are expressing concern. Family members are staging interventions. And the person focusing on themselves starts to wonder if maybe everyone is right. Maybe they have become selfish. Maybe they've gone too far. Maybe they should go back to being who they were. This is the moment where almost everyone fails. Jung documented it repeatedly. The person reaches the edge of genuine transformation and retreats because the social cost feels too high. They resume their old patterns, pick up the emotional labor, start answering every call again. The relief from others is immediate and overwhelming. Everyone is so glad you're back to normal, but the person who goes back knows something terrible that they can never unknow. They chose other people's comfort over their own becoming, and that knowledge creates a quiet desperation that never fully resolves. Jung's message to people at this critical juncture was unequivocal. The discomfort of continuing is temporary. The cost of retreating is permanent. The people pressuring you to return to your old self are not doing so because they care about your well-being. They're doing so because your transformation threatens the system that was built on your self-sacrifice. Their comfort depended on your compliance. Your individuation is not their loss to grieve. It's your life to claim. If you're in this process right now, if you've been turning inward and the world is screaming at you to turn back outward, Jung would tell you something that might sound harsh but is deeply true. The people who can't handle your self-focus are showing you exactly why your self-focus is necessary. Their inability to function without your emotional labor is not evidence that you should keep providing it. It's evidence that they never developed the capacity to manage their own inner world, and that's their work to do, not yours. Focusing on yourself and forgetting about everyone else isn't the end of your capacity for connection. It's the beginning of your capacity for real connection. Connection that's chosen, not compelled. Generous, not depleted. Present, not performative. But you have to go through the passage first, through the emptiness, through the shadow, through the grief of lost relationships, through the guilt that everyone will pile on you for daring to develop a self. Jung spent his career watching people either make it through this passage or turn back. The ones who turned back lived functional but hollow lives, always aware of the self they had abandoned to keep everyone else comfortable. The ones who made it through emerged into something he could only describe as psychological wholeness, not perfection, not enlightenment, just the simple, profound experience of being a complete person who relates to others from fullness rather than from the desperate need to be needed. That wholeness is available to you, but it requires the one thing everyone around you will tell you is wrong, focusing entirely on yourself and letting everyone else figure out their own lives, not forever, but long enough to discover that you exist, that you have preferences and desires and boundaries and a rich inner world that's been waiting your entire life for you to finally show up and inhabit it. That's what happens when you focus only on yourself. You don't become selfish, you become real. And real, as Jung discovered, is the only foundation that genuine love, genuine connection, and genuine life can be built on. Everything else is performance. Everything else is accommodation. Everything else is the slow death of a self that never got the chance to live. If you haven't yet, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get true self-discovery.